Ancient Macedonia, the land of King Philip II, one of the greatest rulers of the ancient world, and his son Alexander the Great, the conqueror who changed history forever. Anyone who studies the ancient world inevitably encounters Macedonia, and their journey often begins with the stories of these two towering figures: Philip's rise to power, his unification of the Greek world, and Alexander's vast conquests across Asia and Africa. Yet one cannot truly understand these men without first knowing the people they came from, for the history of the Macedonians stretches back centuries earlier to the legendary founding of their kingdom. In this video, we will discover who the ancient Macedonians truly were, their origins, their land, their kingship, and most importantly, their culture. To understand the origins of the Macedonians, we need to journey back to the late Bronze Age. During that period, the Mycenaean people inhabited mainland Greece and the Aegean Sea, with heavily fortified cities centered around palaces that served as political, economic, and religious hubs. These cities were largely independent, but occasionally formed loose confederations. The Mycenaeans spoke an early form of Greek, which is preserved in the Linear B script. Archaeological excavations have revealed extensive trade between the Mycenaeans and peoples of Anatolia and the northern Balkans, including the exchange of weapons and pottery. Despite cultural differences, these populations were closely related. Most derived around 70 to 80% of their ancestry from Neolithic Anatolian farmers, while populations of the Greek mainland and the rest of the Balkans also carried roughly 25% Indo-European ancestry, along with a small contribution from local hunter-gatherers. The Mycenaeans both traded with and fought against contemporary powers such as the Hittites. The entire eastern Mediterranean, along with Mesopotamia, was connected through what we might call an early globalized economy in which goods and people moved over vast distances. But in the 12th century BC, this interconnected world came crashing down. Famines, rebellions, and widespread invasions led to the collapse of the palaces and trade networks. Cities were abandoned and literacy disappeared in Greece and Anatolia. This period, known as the Bronze Age collapse, brought chaos across much of the eastern Mediterranean. In its aftermath, Greece entered the Dark Ages. Population shrank and settlements became much simpler. Yet this period was also one of slow transformation. Many Greeks migrated, founding new settlements across the peninsula, the Aegean Islands, and western Anatolia. Emerging from the Dark Ages, the Greeks were divided into 4 tribes: the Dorians, Ionians, Aeolians, and Achaeans, each with its own dialect and cultural features, though all were closely related. Trade networks slowly re-emerged, and by the 9th century BC, a new era of social and political organization was beginning to take shape. As Greece entered the Archaic period, settlements grew in size and complexity, giving rise to the city-state, or polis. Each polis was an independent political community centered on an urban core, surrounded by its countryside and united by shared laws, religious cults, and identity. Early on, most polis were ruled by kings or basileis, local leaders who combined religious, military, and judicial authority. Over time, however, royal power waned, giving way to aristocratic councils dominated by powerful families. This new system helped set the stage for the later rise of tyranny and eventually democracy. During the Archaic period, the Greeks adapted the Phoenician alphabet, creating a flexible writing system suited to their language. By adding symbols for vowel sounds, they developed the first true phonetic alphabet. The reintroduction of writing revived record-keeping, allowed poetry to be written down, and stimulated intellectual life. The earliest reference to the Macedonians in literature appears in the works of Hesiod, an ancient Greek poet from Boeotia who lived during the 8th and 7th centuries BC. In his Catalogue of Women, preserved in fragments through both archaeological discoveries and Byzantine scholarship, Hesiod mentions Macedon, the ancestor of the Macedonians. The Byzantine emperor and scholar Constantine VII Porphyrogenitus writes, "The district Macedonia took its name from Macedon, the son of Zeus and Thea, Deucalion's daughter. As Hesiod says, and she conceived and bore to Zeus, who delights in the thunderbolt, 2 sons, Magnes and Macedon, rejoicing in horses, who dwell round about Pieria and Olympus." In Greek mythology, Deucalion, the son of the Titan Prometheus, is a figure analogous to Noah. After Zeus flooded the world, he and his wife Pyrrha repopulated it. Hesiod places the Macedonians and the Magnetes north and south of Mount Olympus, respectively. The next accounts of Macedonia come from the historians Herodotus and Thucydides, who lived during the 5th century BC. Herodotus provides the oldest surviving account of the kingdom's origins, though his narrative blends history with the myths promoted by the Macedonian royals, known as the Temenid or Argead dynasty. According to Herodotus, the Argeads trace their ancestry to the city of Argos in southern Greece. 3 brothers, Gaunis, Hierapus, and Perdiccas, were said to be descendants of Temenus, king of Argos, and therefore part of the lineage of Heracles, son of Zeus. Driven northward, the brothers reached the highlands of western Macedonia, where they briefly served a local ruler. One tended horses, another oxen, and the youngest, Perdiccas, cared for smaller livestock. The queen, who baked bread for the household, noticed that the loaf of Perdiccas mysteriously doubled in size each day. Interpreting this as a sign of divine favor, the king expelled the brothers from his lands. When they asked for their wages, he mockingly offered them only the sunlight streaming through the roof. Perdiccas accepted the gesture, tracing a circle around the patch of light with his knife, an omen of his future rule. Enraged by this action, the king sent horsemen after them, but the brothers escaped by crossing a swelling river. They eventually settled near Mount Bermion and founded the Kingdom of Macedon. As we mentioned, Herodotus may have recorded a story that the Macedonian kings themselves promoted, one that linked them to the line of Heracles and by extension to Zeus. Such a lineage not only legitimized their claim to rule all Macedonians, but also enhanced their prestige in the wider Greek world. In the centuries that followed, Macedonian rulers proudly traced their ancestry to Heracles, and most contemporaries believed it to be true. Thucydides agrees with Herodotus regarding the ancestry of the Argead dynasty, but goes on to offer a much more sober historical account on how the Macedonians expanded their kingdom, which we will discuss shortly afterwards. During the late Classical period, the Macedonian dynasty appears to have introduced an additional founding figure. According to the historians Theopompus of Chios and Marsyas of Pella, this founder was Charanos, son of Temenus of Argos. The story holds that he left his homeland with a band of warriors and, following the guidance of the Oracle of Delphi, sought to establish a new kingdom by tracking a herd of goats. Upon reaching his destination, Charanos founded the city of Aigai, which became the capital of his new kingdom. During the Hellenistic and Roman periods, historians offered various alternative explanations for Macedonia's early history. Many proposed that the royal house originated not from the Argos of the Peloponnese, but from Argos Oresticon in the western edge of Macedonia. Some accounts suggest that even if the dynasty were foreign, the Macedonians themselves were indigenous. Others portray both rulers and people as migrants. Polybius claimed the Macedonians descended from the Dorians of Pindos, while Strabo records that some historians considered them a northern branch of the Aeolians. In conclusion, nearly all ancient Greek sources in Macedonia contradict one another and often conflict with archaeological evidence regarding chronology, ancestry, the number of early kings, and the original homeland of the Macedonians. By examining the ancient sources through a historiographical lens, and by taking into account linguistic and archaeological evidence uncovered over the past century, we can propose a plausible historical reconstruction of the origins of the Macedonian people. The Kingdom of Macedon is believed to have been founded around the 8th century BC. The Macedonians, or Macedones, a name likely meaning the tall ones or highlanders, were a Greek-speaking tribe inhabiting the northeastern slopes of the Pindos Mountains. They herded sheep and goats, moving seasonally between the mountains and the lowlands. At some point, the tribe expanded eastward, led by the heads of prominent families. In the east, they encountered a variety of tribes, some Greek, some Thracian, and others who spoke an Indo-European language closely related to both Greek and Thracian. During this expansion, the Macedonians either subjugated or peacefully assimilated some of these tribes, while others were displaced and settled elsewhere. Macedonia was divided into upper and lower regions. In Lower Macedonia, the Argead kings established Aigai as an administrative center, controlling the plains and the mountain passes. In Upper Macedonia, several Macedonian kings ruled each region independently. However, between 600 and 400 BC, these territories gradually came under the administration of the Argead kings, remaining semi-independent under a loose confederation. Eventually, they were fully absorbed during the reign of Philip II, forming a single, unified Macedonian kingdom. Some local tribes initially governed themselves under the supervision of the kings, but over time, all developed a shared Macedonian identity. Macedonia during the Archaic period was a geographically diverse kingdom, stretching from the foothills of the Pindus Mountains in the west to the Axios Valley and the Thermae Gulf in the east, and from the slopes of Mount Olympus in the south to the Erigon River in the north. The major rivers, the Aliakmanos and Axios, were crucial for both irrigation and communication and served as natural boundaries, while smaller streams and tributaries nourished fertile plains ideal for cereal cultivation. The landscape included rugged, heavily forested mountains such as Bermian and the Pierian Range, covered with oak and pine. The forests provided timber, a highly valuable resource for construction and shipbuilding, especially in southern Greece where forests had been depleted. In winter, snow blanketed the mountains and icy winds swept down to the lower plains. Summers brought hot, dry air to the valleys along the rivers, whose waters swelled in spring from melting snow, sustaining the fertile fields. The forests were teeming with wildlife, including wolves, bears, lynx, deer, wild boar, foxes, wild goats, and even lions. The land was also rich in mineral resources, which together with timber formed the basis of Macedonian wealth. Macedonians practiced a combination of subsistence agriculture, growing wheat, barley and legumes, and animal husbandry, raising sheep, goats and cattle in upland pastures. Hunting supplemented their diet and provided furs, while forest resources supplied timber for construction and fuel. These activities supported a sedentary lifestyle in the valleys and a more mobile pastoral lifestyle in the mountains. Coastal Macedonians who lived in the lower Thermae Gulf engaged in fishing and limited sea trade. South of Macedonia were the Thessalians, a Greek people of the Aeolian tribe. The region was organized around polis with oligarchic aristocracies, sometimes forming intercity alliances. Thessaly was comprised of 4 tribal areas. Owing to the fertile Thessalian plain, they maintained large numbers of horses, and their aristocracy formed elite cavalry units renowned across the Greek world. Thessalians and Macedonians influenced each other culturally, sharing religious centers and later developing complex power dynamics. To the west were the Epirots, a Greek people of the Dorian tribe who inhabited the Pindus Mountains. During the Archaic period, they lived tribally as an ethnos with no polis. They later organized into city-states, commonwealths, and eventually powerful kingdoms. Northwest lay the Illyrians, a tribal people occupying mountains, river valleys, and coasts as far north as Istria. They eventually formed their own kingdoms and frequently raided Macedonian territory, though at times they also allied with the Argead kings. To the north were the Paeonians, a tribal people who were nonetheless more politically organized than their neighbors. By the Archaic period, they had already established a kingdom and had become significantly Hellenized. To the northeast lived the Thracians, a collection of hundreds of independent tribes known for their prowess in battle. They too later formed a kingdom. Rich in natural resources, Thrace became a hotspot of conflict. Macedonians and Thracians interacted through trade, warfare, diplomacy, and intermarriage, with cultural exchange flowing both ways. To the east lay the Halkidiki Peninsula, a patchwork of cultures, mostly Thracians in the north and Greeks in the south. Some of the Greeks had settled there after the Bronze Age collapse, while most arrived during the Archaic Period. Colonies from Euboea, Corinth, Andros, and others created a diverse cultural landscape, and despite their varied origins, the cities often formed mutual defensive alliances. Finally, on the Thamaic Gulf were the cities of Methoni and Pydna, founded by Euboean settlers. Not much is known about Macedonia during the Archaic period due to the absence of contemporary literary sources. Aside from brief references to the actions of a few Argead kings, our main historical insight is that at some point, Lower Macedonia expanded eastward toward the Strymon River, bringing more fertile lowlands under its control. This expansion provided additional grazing land for horses and allowed the Macedonians to further develop their cavalry. What we do have, however, is archaeological evidence, mostly from the 6th century BC. Much of this comes from the vast necropolis outside the city of Aigai, which contains thousands of tombs. The necropolis was used continuously from the Bronze Age until the 3rd century BC. Unfortunately, the majority of these tombs were looted, mostly by Celtic mercenaries during the Hellenistic period, but many were found intact by archaeologists. In the archaic burials, archaeologists discovered a wealth of artifacts that reveal the prosperity and cultural sophistication of early Macedon. The burials range from simple pit graves to complex-built cist graves and royal tombs, sometimes involving cremation. Men and women were interred with rich grave goods, including gold jewelry, silver and bronze vessels, and furniture decorated with gold and ivory, which emphasized the wealth and status of the deceased. It is almost certain that some graves belonged to queens and noblewomen, such as the spectacularly furnished burial of the Lady of Aigai. Among the most remarkable finds are the gold decorative elements. Thin gold foils were applied to the face, chest, hands, and feet. Faces were sometimes covered with full or partial masks, including designs reminiscent of Mycenaean Bronze Age masks. Male burials occasionally included helmets of Macedonian or Halkidian type, adorned with lions, rams, and symbols of the sun. Gold held deep symbolic significance. As a metal that does not corrode, it represented eternity. Its light and color were associated with the sun, the celestial body symbolizing life, immortality, and rebirth. Cosmic motifs were especially prominent in female burials. Diadems and tiaras depicted the sky and zodiac constellations, while rosettes on the torso corresponded to the sun's movement through the cosmos. Apotropaic symbols such as the gorgonion were used to protect the dead. The diadem of the Lady of Aigai is rich with Greek mythological imagery, depicting deities such as Hephaestus and Dionysus, and heroes such as Theseus, Heracles, and Odysseus. Additionally, weapons such as javelins, spears, daggers, and swords were commonly included in the burials. Various vessels, ariboloi, amphoriskoi, alabastra, locally made clay oil containers, and symposian vessels for mixing wine also accompanied the dead. Many items were imported from places such as Corinth and the islands of Chios and Samos, demonstrating that the Macedonian capital maintained active trade and cultural connections with the wider Greek world. By the late Archaic period, the Greek world was undergoing significant transformations. Trade expanded, increasing wealth and cultural exchange across the Mediterranean. The city-states were solidifying their political structures, shifting from strict oligarchies to looser forms of aristocracy that included not only traditional aristocrats but also newly wealthy merchant families. During this period of change, many cities were ruled by tyrants, and Athens saw the early development of democratic institutions. Art and sculpture began to move toward more naturalistic representation, while religious practices became more standardized. Civic participation grew, and social hierarchies became more clearly defined. In southern Greece, burials with lavish grave goods almost disappeared, Instead, wealth was displayed through communal projects such as temples and theatres. These transformations fostered intellectual, political, and cultural developments, establishing the foundation of classical Greece. Having discussed the evolution of the polis during this period, we will now turn to the culture of the Macedonians in the late Archaic and early Classical periods, with particular attention to their kingship. The king occupied the central position in Macedonian society, serving simultaneously as a military leader, chief administrator, judge, and overseer of religious rituals. Surrounding him were the hetairoi, his companions in arms. They lived close to the king within the palace or nearby quarters, sharing in daily life, ceremonial duties, and hunting expeditions. The hetairoi were the king's trusted advisors and closest confidants. They led portions of the army, some served as bodyguards, and others administered territories and participated in diplomatic missions, forming a close-knit aristocratic circle that reinforced the power of the king. Beyond his companions, the king consulted a wider council of nobles and local leaders who helped organize campaigns, manage resources, and maintain cohesion across the kingdom. The women of the court, though largely excluded from the public affairs, played important roles. Queens and princesses were entrusted with religious rites, the supervision of palace life, and in some cases could exercise political influence or even manage the kingdom during periods of regency. From youth, the men of Aigai were trained in hunting and combat. Hunting in particular was not merely a sport, but a form of martial education, cultivating skills, courage, and cohesion among the nobility. The Macedonians maintained a social order reminiscent of Homeric epics. The king as first among equals, and the aristocracy organized in kin-based groups, each with its retainers and warriors. The Argead house controlled the fertile plains and strategic mountain passes, enabling them to collect tribute and maintain authority over a diverse territory. Their settlements, unlike the tightly organized polis of central Greece or the Peloponnese, were mostly villages with some central fortifications and urban centers. Over time, the main urban settlements began to resemble the polis of southern Greece. At that time, Macedonia would comprise both ethnoi, tribal collectives based on kinship, and polis like Aigai, Edessa, and Berea, highly organized cities with structured governments that elected archons. All of these were ultimately subject to the authority of the king. The earliest well-documented Macedonian king is Amyntas I, who ruled toward the end of the Archaic period. During that time, the Achaemenid Persian Empire conquered Anatolia and began advancing into the Balkans. Amyntas maintained Macedonian autonomy through diplomacy and tribute, positioning his kingdom as a minor but strategically significant state within the expanding Persian sphere. His son, Alexander I, succeeded him in 498 BC. Alexander sought to integrate Macedonia into the Greek world of the polis, both culturally and politically, through active engagement. Early in his reign, he was admitted to participate in the Olympic Games due to his claimed ancestry from Argos. Despite the fact that Macedonians spoke a Greek dialect and worshipped Greek gods, some of the Hellenes of the southern city-states perceived Macedonians as a barbarian people. This view arose largely from cultural differences and Macedonia's geographic proximity to non-Greek tribes. Interactions and occasional intermarriage with these non-Greek groups, such as the Illyrians and Thracians, reinforced the perception among southern Greeks that Macedonians were less civilized. The social and political structures of Macedonia further shaped these perceptions. Unlike the polis of southern Greece, Macedonia retained features reminiscent of Homeric Achaean society, archaic and monarchic, with kings occupying central military and judicial roles. In this sense, Macedonians were Greek in language, cult, and myth, but not in the civic and political models that defined the Hellenes of the classical period. It should be noted that the term barbarian was highly relative. Many southern Greeks considered those living north of Boeotia to be barbarian, largely due to their rough tongue and way of life. The term barbaros itself is extremely ancient, dating back to Mycenaean Greece, where it primarily meant foreigner or someone who spoke an unintelligible language. In the classical and Hellenistic periods, this term would also apply to Greeks who spoke a different dialect. Plato describes the Aeolian dialect as barbarian, and Hesiod of Alexandria calls the dialect spoken by the Dorians of the northwestern Peloponnese barbarian. Most of the surviving sources come from Athens, therefore they reflect only a limited perspective. For example, the Thessalians or the Acarnanians were much more friendly to the Macedonians, but we lack literary sources from them to determine whether they considered Macedonians Greek. The perception of Macedonians as barbarians intensified during the reign of Philip II as he expanded southward and waged war against many of the city-states. Nonetheless, there were many ancient scholars and writers who considered the Macedonians to be Greek. Because most surviving literary sources from the classical and early Hellenistic periods come from Athens, modern scholars have often inherited Athenian biases. These sources frequently portray non-Athenian Greeks as culturally inferior. This bias is similar to the assumption repeated in modern scholarship that the Greeks universally drank only diluted wine or cooked exclusively with olive oil because they considered lard and butter barbaric. While this may have been true in Athens and other major urban centers, many Greeks from the Aetolians to the Epirites and from the Locrians to the northern Thessalians regularly drank undiluted wine and used lard for cooking. Recognizing these biases allows a more nuanced understanding. Macedonians were part of the Greek world, yet distinct in their social structures, political institutions, and geography. It is also important to remember that in the classical period, Hellenism was a flexible concept. Although Greeks acknowledged shared customs, beliefs, and ways of life, their primary loyalties lay with their own polis or ethnos, often fueling fierce inter-Greek conflicts. During the Second Persian invasion of Greece, Alexander I submitted to Xerxes' forces, providing troops and accepting nominal Persian hegemony. However, he was also in contact with the Greek city-states, warning them when not to engage the Persians and alerting them to the enemy's movements. After the Persian defeat at Salamis, the Greeks crushed the Persian army at the Battle of Plataea. In the following decades, the Greeks carried the war into the Aegean and Anatolia. The Athenians formed the Delian League, and tensions between Athens and Sparta, then the two major powers in the Greek world, began to rise. In 448 BC, Alexander I was succeeded by his son, Perdiccas II. Perdiccas ruled during a time of instability. The kingdom was fragmented, as aristocratic families and semi-independent regions in Upper Macedonia held considerable autonomy. Perdiccas also faced external pressure from Thracians and Illyrians, while the rising tensions between Athens and Sparta and the outbreak of the Peloponnesian War forced him to maneuver diplomatically through changing alliances. Despite this, he managed to maintain a notably long reign. Perdiccas was succeeded by his son Archelaos in 413 BC. Archelaos sought to introduce classical culture into Macedonia and make Aigai a major center of Greek culture. He introduced symposia, theatres, and architectural developments. He also invited painters, sculptors, and intellectuals from all over the Greek world. Among the invited were the great tragedian Euripides and the painter Xerxes. Archelaos expanded the city of Pella, creating a new capital for the Macedonian state, while also enhancing the grandeur of Aigai. He reorganized ceremonies and festivals, most notably the festival at Dion in honor of Zeus and the Muses, which attracted visitors from throughout the Greek world. This reorganization had institutional significance, linking neighboring peoples and city-states to Macedonia and providing a venue for civic and political engagement, foreshadowing the greater integration that would come under Philip II. Archelaos died in 399 BC, having ruled for 14 years. The subsequent reigns, from King Orestes to Amyntas IV, roughly spanning the late 5th to mid-4th centuries BC, were marked by instability. Macedonian kings faced internal rivalries, assassinations, and invasions by Illyrians and Thracians. By the time Philip II ascended the throne, Macedonia was financially strained, militarily weak, and highly vulnerable. By the mid-4th century BC, Greece was politically fragmented and weakened from decades of conflict. Athens retained its cultural prestige, but its military power had diminished. Sparta had lost its hegemony and was constrained by its rigid social structure. Thebes briefly emerged as a dominant power following its victory over Sparta at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC under the leadership of the brilliant general and statesman Epaminondas. Alliances of tribes and cities like the Thessalian, Chalkidian, Aetolian and Achaean leagues began to form, and tensions were rising once again. Philip II was born in 382 BC during a turbulent period for the Macedonian kingdom. As a child, he experienced life at the mercy of foreign powers, first as a political hostage among the Illyrians and later at the city of Thebes. Although a hostage, he was treated well, receiving a Greek education and gaining knowledge of military tactics, politics, and culture. Philip's father, King Amyntas III, died in 369 BC. The throne passed briefly to his eldest son, Alexander II, who ruled for only a year before being assassinated. The second son, Perdiccas III, then became king, but died in battle against the Illyrians 8 years later. His son Amyntas IV was only 6 years old at the time, so Philip became regent and tutor to the child. Soon after, though, Philip claimed the throne for himself while sparing the young boy, whom he did not consider a threat. Thus, Philip was crowned king in 360 BC at the age of 22 and immediately set about transforming his kingdom. He reorganized the military, which had previously relied mainly on cavalry and largely untrained levies of infantry. He introduced the sarissa, a long spear 4 to 6 meters in length, which gave his phalanx unprecedented reach in battle. He also developed a cavalry force capable of decisive flanking maneuvers and made significant advances in siege warfare. By implementing systematic training and disciplined formations, Philip gradually transformed Macedon's forces into Greece's first standing professional army. Philip was also a genius in politics and diplomacy. He used both coercion and persuasion to secure loyalty from local nobility and neighboring tribes, often binding them to his rule with gifts of land and positions at court. Over his lifetime, he married 7 wives, nearly all from different regions, to secure alliances. During his reign, Upper and Lower Macedonia were finally officially united as one under the Archaic house. Philip established the royal pagus, a corps of young men from Macedonian noble families. They served at the court, assisting the king in daily duties while receiving instruction in warfare, leadership, and court etiquette. Their service prepared them for future roles as officers or administrators. By bringing the sons of noble families into his inner circle, Philip secured their loyalty and also discouraged rebellion in Upper Macedonia, since any revolt by the local aristocrats would endanger their own children, who were effectively held as hostages. Philip's court became a center of Hellenic culture. He actively funded artists and scholars, importing Greek talent to Macedon. Philip's architectural and artistic projects, such as the Grand Palace at Aigai and the Philippion at Olympia, celebrated his family and dynasty and showcased the kingdom's wealth. Throughout his reign, Philip led numerous campaigns and battles, often fighting on the front lines himself, where he sustained many injuries. First, he secured Macedonia's northern borders by subduing the southern Illyrians and the Thracian kingdom, while conquering the cities of Methone and Amphipolis. Control of Amphipolis also gave him access to Mount Pangaeon, rich in silver and gold mines, enabling him to fund his military campaigns and maintain his army. Philip then skillfully exploited an ongoing war among the Greek city-states to advance his interests. This conflict was the Third Sacred War, which began when the Phocians were accused by the Amphictyonic League of cultivating sacred land at Delphi, an act considered sacrilege. The Amphictyonic League was an ancient religious association of Greek states with significant political influence. Angered by what they saw as a politically motivated accusation, the Phocians seized the sanctuary of Delphi by force, used its treasury to hire mercenaries, and attacked their opponents. The Greek city-states, excluding Athens, Sparta, and Pherae, turned against Phocas. After a series of engagements, Philip joined the war. Philip intervened with a combined Macedonian and Thessalian force. At the Battle of the Crocus Field, they defeated the allied Phocian and Athenian forces. Following this victory, Philip was elected Archon of Thessaly and secured a position in the Amphictyonic League, strengthening his influence over Greek affairs. He next turned northeast and subdued the Chalkidian League by capturing Olynthus in 348 BC. Finally, in 338, Philip won the decisive Battle of Chaeronea against the combined forces of Athens and Thebes. His 18-year-old son, Alexander, commanding the cavalry, distinguished himself by defeating the Sacred Band, the elite Theban warriors. This victory effectively brought most of Greece under Macedonian control. Philip created the League of Corinth, a pan-Hellenic alliance uniting virtually all Greek states except Sparta under his leadership. He presented it as a campaign to establish peace among the Greeks, free Greek cities in Anatolia, and eventually invade the Persian Empire in retribution for the invasions of Greece. The invasion of Persia was, in theory, good for everyone. Philip sought to expand his realm and acquire the wealth and fertile lands of Anatolia. Many Greeks, particularly mercenaries, were enticed by the prospect of personal gain from the riches of Persia. Idealists and pan-Hellenists enthusiastically supported the campaign as a step toward Greek unity and glory. Even those primarily loyal to their individual polis might have seen merit in Philip's plans, perhaps believing that they could leverage the campaign to raise their own forces and revolt against Macedon while Philip was away. However, Philip would not live to see his great plans come to fruition. In 336 BC, at the age of 46, he was assassinated by Pausanias, one of his bodyguards, during the wedding of his daughter Cleopatra in the former capital. The motive behind the assassination remains uncertain. Pausanias may have acted out of personal grievances, or it could have been part of a larger conspiracy involving other Macedonian royals, or even orchestrated by the Persian King of Kings. Pausanias was immediately killed by the rest of Philip's bodyguards, so the reason for his actions was never revealed. After the death of Philip, Alexander was proclaimed King of Macedon at the age of 20. Despite his youth, he was exceptionally well educated and possessed a charismatic and commanding presence that allowed him both to inspire his soldiers and maintain authority over his generals. Upon ascending the throne, he swiftly secured Macedonia and neutralized potential rivals. Unlike Philip, who had often preferred diplomacy and avoidance of conflict, Alexander was eager to prove himself on the battlefield and assert his legitimacy as king. Restless and ambitious, he sought not only to carry out his father's vision, but to surpass it. He began by subduing rebellious Thracians and Illyrians. When Thebes revolted against Macedonian rule, he decisively defeated the Thebans in battle and destroyed their city, sending a clear warning to other Greek city-states contemplating revolt. He then gathered a formidable army from across the Balkan Peninsula, composed of Macedonian cavalry and phalanx, Thessalian horsemen, Greek hoplites, and Thracian and Paeonian light troops. The army numbered around 48,100 infantry, 6,100 cavalry, and included a fleet of 120 ships. Thus, in 334, Alexander began his campaign to conquer the Persian Empire. At the Granicus River, Alexander's careful use of terrain and tactical ingenuity allowed him to defeat a numerically superior Persian force. His victories at Issus in 333 and Gargamella in 331 further demonstrated his strategic brilliance. Alexander adapted swiftly to unfamiliar challenges, such as guerrilla warfare in Bactria and Sogdiana. He also integrated conquered peoples into his army, establishing a multinational force that included archers, javelin throwers, and cavalry units from across Asia. He established new cities and outposts to secure his rule and tighten administrative control over the lands he conquered. A garrison was left in every major city, and Greeks from the mainland were encouraged to move to the newly founded settlements. Alexander sought to shape a vision of cultural and political unity. He aimed to merge Greek and Persian societies, envisioning an oikoumene, a world empire in which diverse peoples could coexist under a single ruler. He adopted Persian clothing and customs and arranged intermarriages between Macedonians and Persian nobility. These efforts, however, provoked resentment among many of his soldiers, who viewed his embrace of Persian practices with suspicion. Alexander tried to maintain a strong Greco-Macedonian identity, continued to lead personally in battle, and carefully balanced his imperial ambitions with the expectations of his troops. While planning future conquests into Arabia and Western Africa, Alexander's life ended abruptly in Babylon in 323 BC. After a night of heavy drinking, he fell seriously ill and died a few days later. His death came as a shock to all, and the absence of a clear succession plan soon led to instability and ultimately the fragmentation of his empire. What followed was 40 years of chaos, the wars of the Diadochi fought by Alexander's generals, the successors who carved up the empire for themselves. Ptolemy took Egypt, Seleucus gained most of Asia, Lysimachus held Thrace, Cassander seized Macedonia, and Antigonus the One-Eyed tried to reunite the empire under his rule. The dream of unity died with him at Ipsus in 301 BC, leaving behind a world of competing Greek kingdoms. After decades of conflict, the major kingdoms and empires of the period were firmly established by 281 BC. In Egypt, the Ptolemies ruled as god-kings from Alexandria, blending Greek and Egyptian traditions and turning their capital into the intellectual heart of the Mediterranean. In the northeast, the Seleucid Empire stretched from the Aegean to the borders of India, a vast and unwieldy realm where Greek and Persian cultures coexisted. In the east, the Greco-Bactrian kingdom broke away around 250 BC. It fused Greek culture with Central Asian influences and extended into India, paving the way for the Indo-Greek kingdom. Greek settlers poured into new cities across Asia and Africa, which became vibrant centers of trade and culture. Local elites adopted Greek customs, while Greek immigrants incorporated Eastern art and religious practices. Due to the spread of Greek language and culture, this era would come to be known as the Hellenistic Period. Back in Europe, Macedonia was in a rough shape. The Antigonid dynasty, founded by Antigonus I's descendants, struggled to preserve the kingdom. After years of instability, Antigonus II Gonatas restored order in 277 BC. Wise and pragmatic, he rebuilt Macedonia's defenses, reorganized its administration, defeated a massive invasion of Celts, and maintained control of Greece through a network of fortresses and naval bases. His successors, Demetrius II and Antigonus III Doson, continued to balance diplomacy and war to defend Macedonia from Illyrians, Aetolians, and others. By the 3rd century BC, Rome had transformed from original Italian state into a major power in the Mediterranean. Its successive victories, coupled with an expanding network of allies, brought the Republic considerable wealth and growing confidence. Rome's first engagement with the Balkans occurred in Illyria, where rampant piracy along the Adriatic Sea disrupted Roman commerce. Following the defeat of the Illyrians, the Romans became increasingly involved in the intricate rivalries of the Greek world. The Macedonian kings sought to reassert their authority over Greece, while the Greek city-states were divided into competing leagues, frequently turning to Rome for support against one another. The long struggle between Rome and Antigonid Macedonia unfolded over 4 major wars between 214 and 148 BC. The First Macedonian War began when King Philip V sought to expand his influence while Rome was distracted by Hannibal's invasion of Italy. Philip allied with Carthage, hoping to dominate the Balkans and the Aegean. Rome responded by forming alliances with Greek powers such as the Aetolian League and the Kingdom of Pergamon. The war ended without a decisive victory, but it marked the beginning of Rome's deep entanglement in Greek affairs. Philip's ambition eventually reignited conflict, leading to the Second Macedonian War. The Romans sided with the Kingdom of Pergamon and the island of Rhodes, and a 3-year conflict ensued. It culminated at the Battle of Cynoscephali in 197 BC, where the Roman legions crushed Philip's phalanx. Macedonia was forced to abandon its conquests and surrender its fleet, but Philip retained his kingdom, which still held significant, though reduced, power. Meanwhile, the Aetolians, wary of Rome's presence in the Balkans, invited Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, also known as Antiochus the Great, to form an alliance against the Romans. Rome defeated them at the Battle of Thermopylae in 191 BC and the Battle of Magnesia in 190. 2 decades later, King Perseus, the son of Philip V, had rebuilt Macedonia's wealth and restored its military strength. Alarmed by this resurgence, Rome launched an assault on the kingdom, initiating the Third Macedonian War. Over the course of 3 years, Roman forces faced fierce resistance across Thessaly and Macedonia, but in the Battle of Pydna, the Romans defeated the Macedonian army. In the aftermath, Macedonia's monarchy was abolished, and the kingdom was divided into 4 client republics under Roman oversight. The Romans destroyed the royal palaces, and most of the Macedonian elites were killed, deported to Italy, or fled abroad. However, the Macedonian spirit had not been fully subdued. In 150 BC, a man named Andriscus, claiming to be a son of Perseus, named himself Philip VI, rallying an army of Macedonians still loyal to the old monarchy and allied Thracians. He swiftly overthrew the republican regimes, and his forces even threatened Roman rule in Thessaly, as Thessalian Greeks joined his cause in great numbers. In response, a Roman army was sent to suppress the revolt, only to suffer a devastating defeat at the hands of Andriscus. This shocking loss demonstrated that the Macedonian military, even under a pretender, could still challenge Roman power. Rome, however, quickly regrouped, sending a much larger force in 148 BC. This force decisively defeated Andriscus and finally established permanent Roman control, ending Macedonian independence once and for all. Many Macedonians fled to other regions of the eastern Mediterranean, particularly to the Kingdom of Pergamon and Ptolemaic Egypt, where new settlements were established. A few remnants of the old Macedonian elite persisted, particularly in towns like Beroea. Governance initially relied on a pro-Roman council, partly formed by young Macedonians, including the royal hunters, a group of 14 to 18-year-old men from elite families who had been integrated into Roman networks. By participating in Roman supervised training and ceremonial duties, they gained exposure to Roman customs and politics, enabling them to mediate between their communities and the new provincial administration. Elsewhere, in regions such as Halkidiki and Pindus, new local elites emerged, comprising a mixture of Italian merchants, Greeks, Thracians, and Illyrians. Despite the gradual Romanization of the region, remote areas like Orestis retained an old Macedonian identity well into the 2nd century AD. Formerly prominent cities such as Aigai and Pella had declined in importance, while the city of Thessalonica had emerged as a major urban center and port. Macedonian religious beliefs and practices were part of the wider Greek religious tradition, but they also displayed distinctive regional characteristics. The major deities worshipped were the Olympian gods. Among them, Zeus, Artemis, and Dionysus held the greatest significance, while Hephaestus and Poseidon were less prominent. In addition to the Olympians, Macedonians revered various other Greek deities and mythical beings, including Asclepius, god of healing, the Dioscoroi, Castor and Pollux, Persephone, the daughter of Demeter and wife of Hades, the god of the underworld, Selene, goddess of the moon, and the Muses, daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory, whose abode was traditionally believed to be the Pierian mountains of Macedonia. Other beings included Rhea, the mother goddess, Enodia, goddess of roads and protection from magic, local nymphs, river gods, and a dragon deity. An especially important figure was the deified hero Heracles, the son of Zeus. In typical Greek fashion, the gods were worshipped under various epithets representing different aspects and characteristics. Zeus occupied the highest place in the pantheon and was regarded as the father of all Macedonians. He was worshipped under epithets such as Zeus Hypsistos, the highest, and Olympios of Mount Olympus. Dionysus was associated with mystery rites and private initiations, promising participants knowledge and preparation for the afterlife. He also functioned as a tutelary deity for young men undergoing coming-of-age rituals. Similarly, Artemis, frequently worshipped as a huntress, served as a tutelary goddess for young girls entering their own rites of passage. She was also venerated as Artemis Eleotia, under which aspect she oversaw childbirth. Heracles was venerated both as a divine hero and as an ancestral figure of the royal family. Macedonian kings regularly sacrificed to him under the epithet Heracles Patros, the ancestral one. As Heracles Kinagidas, the hunting leader, he was linked to the coming of age of elite youths serving as royal hunters and was celebrated in shared sanctuaries with the Greek tribe of the Magnetes in eastern Thessaly. Asclepius also had significant cults throughout Macedonia. Though not as central as Zeus or Artemis, his worship was widespread and reflects the Macedonians' concern with both physical well-being and ritual purification. The most important religious center was the city of Dion, where Macedonian rulers organized grand festivals and athletic contests. Situated at the foot of Mount Olympus, it served as the spiritual heart of the Macedonian kingdom. Zeus was the principal deity worshipped there, but the city also hosted significant cults dedicated to the Muses, Artemis, and Demeter. The sanctuary of Zeus in particular functioned as a major hub of both local and Pan-Hellenic religious activity. Macedonian involvement in Pan-Hellenic religious life increased gradually over many centuries. They frequently consulted the oracles of Delphi and Dodona and eventually participated in the Olympic Games. After conquering the island of Samothrace, Philip II also elevated a local sanctuary there to Pan-Hellenic importance. The king occupied a central role in Macedonian religious life, overseeing daily sacrifices to secure divine favor and presiding over major ceremonies such as the Xandika, an army purification ritual held each spring. As a natural extension of their central religious role, Macedonian monarchs over time came to be deified, most often posthumously. This was not unprecedented in the Greek world, as even generals were sometimes deified in certain regions, and many founders of cities were similarly honored. In contrast to the Greek city-states, which emphasized communal funding and built great temples, Macedonians lacked monumental religious architecture. The few temples discovered by archaeologists were modest and lacked external colonnades. Religious activity instead took place mainly at sanctuaries, altars, and shrines. The kings frequently sponsored these sites, though local city councils also maintained their own shrines. As we mentioned earlier in the video, by the late Archaic period, most Greeks had largely abandoned opulent individual burials to emphasize communal identity. In Macedonia, however, this practice continued among the elite. The Macedonians appear to place particular emphasis on the afterlife. Dionysus was closely linked to rites of initiation that promised a form of continued existence after death, and his cult provided initiates with secret knowledge to navigate the underworld. Elements of Orphism, a mystical tradition associated with the legendary poet Orpheus and the worship of Dionysus as a savior, were present in various regions of Greece and Anatolia. This tradition emphasized the soul's journey after death, promising rebirth and reincarnation, and seems to have attracted many initiates in Macedonia. The so-called Macedonian tombs, built with vaulted chambers and covered by tumuli, became increasingly elaborate over time. Many tomb facades were plastered and painted to resemble temples, symbolically transforming the tomb into a sacred dwelling for the deceased. The tombs were often decorated with vivid murals depicting mythological scenes. In the tombs of Aigai, two painted panels depict Hades, the god of the underworld, and his wife, Persephone. The Tomb of Judgment in Lefkadia is located in Mieza, where Aristotle, the famous Macedonian philosopher, tutored Alexander the Great. Its facade features battle scenes, centaurs, the god Hermes, and two of the judges of the dead, Rhadamanthus and Iacchos. Panels such as these give us a glimpse of what ancient Greek painting looked like, since the vast majority of paintings were done on wooden panels, which haven't survived. Gold continued to be a prominent feature in Macedonian tombs even after the Archaic period. The tomb of Philip II is among the most famous examples, containing golden laurel wreaths and a gold larnax with the so-called son of Vergina. This motif was adopted by the Macedonian royal dynasties and appears in various contexts, including shields and coins. It is worth noting that this emblem was used throughout the ancient Greek world from the Archaic period onward, appearing on shields, vases, medallions, and even in the propylaea of the Acropolis in Athens. Before discussing the language of the ancient Macedonians, we should mention that from the reign of Alexander I, and later more firmly under Archelaus and Philip II, Attic Greek, a subdialect of Ionic Greek and the literary language of Greece, was adopted as the official language of the Macedonian royal court. It was used in official documents, inscriptions, decrees, and other formal contexts. Attic Greek would later evolve into Koine Greek, which Macedonians spread across Africa and Asia after the conquests of Alexander the Great. The adoption of Attic Greek makes it difficult to reconstruct the original Macedonian language. However, there are a few sources that provide insight. These are literary references, personal and place names, and a single archaeological find. The primary literary source is the Lexicon of Hesychius of Alexandria, which contains around 150 Macedonian words. There are several challenges with this lexicon. Hesychius lived during the 5th century AD, by which time the Macedonian language had likely not been spoken for 2 or 3 centuries, having been replaced by Koine Greek and Latin. The words he recorded were transmitted over many centuries, which could have led to errors and corruptions in the manuscripts. Additionally, Hesychius specifically collected words that were rare or sounded strange in literary Greek, which means his lexicon may provide a skewed and incomplete picture of everyday Macedonian speech. Despite these limitations, the lexicon remains an extremely rare and valuable window into the Macedonian language. A few additional words are preserved in ancient theatre plays, where Macedonian characters speak brief lines in their native language. As for personal and place names, the vast majority in Macedonia are recognizably Greek. Examples such as Philippos, Alexandros, Amyntas, and Perdiccas have clear Greek meanings. However, some, like Kebalinos, Betalos, and certain place names, exhibit distinctive phonetic features which may indicate either regional Greek variants or non-Greek origins. Regarding archaeological sources, as we mentioned, the prevalence of Attic Greek as the formal language of Macedonia means that most epigraphic evidence archaeologists had found until recently was in this dialect. Nevertheless, a remarkable discovery was made in 1986 during excavations in the city of Pella, a lead tablet containing a magical katadesmos. A katadesmos is a ritual text intended to call on supernatural powers to influence people through magic. In this tablet, a woman invokes divine powers to ensure her exclusive marriage to a man called Dionysophon. She records her wish that no other woman may join him, and that he should not marry anyone else but her. The text also asks for protection from harm and misfortune, and emphasizes her desire for personal happiness and well-being. What makes the tablet particularly significant is not its magical content, but its language. Because it was written by a local common woman rather than a royal or official scribe, it is presumed to reflect the everyday speech of the region. This is further supported by the numerous misspellings, indicating that it was composed by a non-professional writer. The tablet dates to the early 4th century BC, a period when Attic Greek was not yet widespread in Macedonia. Linguistic analysis shows that the text is written in a northwestern Doric Greek dialect, similar to that spoken in Epirus. Based on the available evidence, the vast majority of linguists believe that Macedonian was either a Doric Greek dialect or a distinct Northern Greek dialect that shared characteristics with Dorian and Aeolian, while also exhibiting features unique to Macedonian. Macedonian does seem to show some interesting differences from other Greek dialects. For example, certain sounds called aspirates were pronounced as normal voiced consonants. The language also kept a long R vowel in many words, where other Greek dialects had changed it over time. As we discussed at the start of the video, the Macedonians shouldn't be remembered only for their achievements in the late classical and Hellenistic periods. It is equally important to study the deep-rooted culture that shaped the great figures who emerged from it, and part of that culture was the profound connection to their homeland. Even Alexander the Great, after conquering vast territories and planning further campaigns before his death, kept his thoughts fixed on Macedonia. According to Diodorus Siculus, his plans included rebuilding major cult centers in Macedonia and constructing a tomb for his father, Philip II, on the scale of the Great Pyramids. He wished to be buried at Aigai in the royal cemetery, and would have been had Ptolemy not intercepted the funeral procession and taken Alexander's body to Egypt to legitimize his own rule. Seleucus, one of Alexander's most accomplished successors, is another great example. He founded Edessa in Upper Mesopotamia, naming it after his beloved home city. Though he had embraced Persian customs and ruled a vast empire, at 80 years old he marched to reclaim Macedonia so he could spend his final years there, leaving Asia to his son. He never achieved this though, as he was assassinated in Thrace. Many settlements founded by the Macedonians bore the names of cities in Macedon, such as Pella and Berea, and throughout their campaigns, Macedonian soldiers longed for home, holding tightly to their traditions. Having settled this, it must also be emphasized how profoundly the Macedonians shaped world history. After Alexander's conquests, Greek culture, including language, laws, philosophy, and music, was spread across vast regions, from Anatolia to Egypt and from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley. Hundreds of thousands of Greeks from the mainland migrated to these territories. During the Hellenistic period, most major cities featured a theatre and a gymnasium. The Greek mainland eventually became less significant compared to the new powerful and intellectual centers of the south and the east. The very meaning of being a Greek or Hellene changed. It no longer referred solely to the citizens of Greek city-states or the tribal Greek ethnoi, but increasingly to anyone in the wider world who possessed paideia, Greek education and cultural identity. Had the Macedonians never risen to prominence, it's likely that the Greeks would not have expanded so extensively to the east and south. Without centuries of Greek military, cultural and legal foundations in these regions, the Roman Empire would likely have faced far greater obstacles in asserting control over the eastern Mediterranean. It is also uncertain whether Christianity would have reached such a broad audience, given the crucial role of Greek language and culture in facilitating its growth across these regions. Needless to say, the Macedonians made a remarkable impact in the history of the world.